A fab that Micron spent the better part of a decade building from empty ground to volume D, DR5 production, Chang Xin Memory Technologies and Hefei replicated that node designation inside a single product cycle. Not the same yield, not the same margins, but DDR5 class silicon, stamped with their name, shipping to domestic buyers. That is not catch-up. That is a different clock speed entirely. The question this race puts on the table: can Micron and Samsung hold a lead when the chaser is accelerating faster than the leader's institutional memory of what a comfortable gap feels like? A breakthrough in memory is never a scorecard flip. It is a change in cadence. The story here is not who holds the highest node today. It is whose development clock is turning faster, and whether the Western lead is wide enough to survive the next 3 splits. Start with a single object. One DDR5 die, smaller than a thumbnail, etched at Micron's leading process node. That die is the unit the whole race runs on. It starts at design tapeout, moves through yield ramp, gets priced into capacity decisions, and in its most advanced form, gets stacked 8 layers high into the product that the artificial intelligence accelerator market is willing to pay for at almost any price. Follow that die. Every leg of this race is a question about whether Micron's version of it stays ahead of Hefei's version. Leg 1 is node entry, specifically how long each side took to move from trailing edge volume production to first DDR5 class commercial silicon. Micron and Samsung each spent multiple years developing the process chemistry, the lithography stack, and the cell architecture that DDR5 requires. The transition from DDR4 was not just a new specification. It demanded a new capacitor structure, a buried wordline geometry that required retooling large portions of the fab floor. Multiple process generations separated their DDR4 peak from the moment DDR5 wafers were producing economically useful output. That journey accumulated what process engineers call institutional fingerprint, the specific hard-won knowledge of which variables kill dies at a given geometry, and what to do about each one. Chang Xin Memory Technologies reportedly moved from DDR4 volume to DDR5 spec silicon in something closer to 1 product cycle. Reports from analysts tracking the Chinese memory sector and the company's own product announcements suggest the generational gap Micron navigated over several years compressed dramatically on the Chinese side. No independent benchmark confirms yield parity. But the node designation is real. The product is in domestic supply channels. And the acceleration curve, not the position, the curve, is what matters for where this race goes next. Think of it like a runner who needed 3 miles to reach race pace, now being chased by someone who hit that same pace in the first mile. The chaser is not ahead. But the acceleration curve is the thing worth watching, not just the scoreboard at this marker. Running the same split as the leader does not mean the same fitness level. It might mean the chaser burned reserves to hit it. First silicon at a node is the split time. Sustaining that node at yield is the fitness test, and that is leg 2. Micron, multi-year, multi-generation, climbed to DDR5 volume. Chang Xin Memory Technologies. Reportedly 1 product cycle to first DDR5 class silicon. A gap that felt like a decade of unreachable process knowledge, just compressed to something measurable in months of difference, not years of impossibility. Chang Xin Memory Technologies is not trying to out-innovate Micron on node physics. It is running a followership strategy at a pace the industry has never seen a mainland Chinese fab sustain. That distinction, pace of following versus pace of leading, is the actual story. And most of the coverage I have read treats it as a binary. Either China is close or it is not. The more useful question is how fast the distance is shrinking per unit of time, because that rate tells you when close becomes a problem that can't be managed by standing still. Yield is the percentage of dies on a wafer that actually work. Every percentage point is time. And this is the leg where the compression story gets sharper, because Chang Xin Memory Technologies is paying the yield tuition faster than Micron expected when it priced the gap. Micron's yield ramp on new nodes is one of its structural competitive advantages. Decades of process fingerprint mean its ramp curves, the trajectory from poor early yield to profitable production percentages, are among the steepest in the industry. It recovers to economic yield faster than most competitors. That is not marketing. It is the accumulated result of running more process nodes, in more conditions, over more years than any Chinese memory fab has yet had the opportunity to attempt. Chang Xin Memory Technologies' early yield on DDR5 class production is, reports suggest, below what Micron and Samsung are running at comparable nodes. Analysts tracking the Chinese memory sector point to yield gap as the most likely explanation for a specific pricing behavior. Chang Xin Memory Technologies' product, reaching domestic channels at below market rates, is consistent with a higher defect cost being absorbed internally rather than passed to the buyer. That is not evidence of weakness, it is evidence of a company choosing to run volume and learn, absorbing the cost of learning as a capital investment in the next generation. Every wafer run at a new node is like a practice lap in changing conditions. The first 100 laps are where you find the wall. The next 1,000 are where you stop hitting it. Chang Xin Memory Technologies is running volume. The clock on yield compression is turning. Here is where I want to be precise about what compression means in this context. Chang Xin Memory Technologies closing the yield gap is not the same as reaching Micron's yield. It means the gap is no longer a theoretical impossibility. It is now a number, and numbers shrink on a learning curve. Yield is like grip on a wet track. You can be running the right split time, but if your process is slipping on every third corner, you are burning cost you did not have to burn. The track is drying. Micron and Samsung, yield ramp to economic production measured in quarters from node entry. Chang Xin Memory Technologies, yield ramp measured in, reports suggest, somewhat longer, with the gap to parity still meaningful, but narrower than it was when the first DDR5 class wafers came out of the Hefei fab. The lead compresses from a generational gap in leg 1 to a yield efficiency gap that is now a matter of learning curve, not a matter of physics being inaccessible. Yield gains are internal. They show up in cost structure, not in headlines. Capacity is external. It shows up in supply volumes, in pricing pressure, in market share arithmetic. That is leg 3, and it runs on a different clock entirely. Capacity is wafer starts per month. How many wafers of that DDR5 die a fab can push through in a given period, and how fast that number is growing. Micron is investing heavily in domestic United States capacity. Its Idaho and New York fabs represent multi-year, multi-billion-dollar commitments, backed in part by the CHIPS and Science Act. Samsung's capacity is distributed across Korea and its Texas site. Both companies are expanding, but the headline expansion numbers are being driven partly by geopolitical necessity, not purely by demand signals. Leading-edge capacity expansion takes years from groundbreaking to first wafer out. Equipment lead times, skilled labor pools, construction schedules, and return on capital discipline all create friction. Chang Xin Memory Technologies' parent ecosystem, backed by China's National Integrated Circuit Industry Investment Fund and Hefei city government, has been building out fab floor space at a pace that multiple industry observers describe as faster than a purely market-driven schedule would justify. Reports suggest installed capacity has grown substantially over the past 2 years. The strategic logic is explicit and not particularly hidden. Run volume at the current node, accumulate process learning, fund the next node, with policy capital rather than market margin. A market-driven fab builds the straightaway only as fast as the race demands. A policy-driven fab builds the straightaway on the assumption the race will come to it. One is reactive. The other is a bet on the schedule shifting. Capacity is the straightaway. It is where technical capability converts into laps completed. Chang Xin Memory Technologies is lengthening its straightaway faster than Micron's return on capital models anticipated. That does not mean Chang Xin Memory Technologies leads. It means the next leg runs on a longer track, with more wafer starts compounding the learning curve discussed in leg 2. And here is the pushback I owe you before calling this compression. Wafer starts on a node that Micron has already migrated past is not the same clock. If Chang Xin Memory Technologies is scaling DDR5 class capacity, while Micron is already running its next generation node in volume, the capacity numbers can converge on paper, while the technology gap holds in practice. I am calling leg 3 compression, not closure. Those are genuinely different things, and conflating them is the most common analytical mistake I see in coverage of this race. Micron and Samsung, capacity growth constrained by equipment lead times, labor pools, and return on capital discipline. Chang Xin Memory Technologies, capacity growth running on a policy-backed schedule less sensitive to those constraints. Expansion pace that reports suggest outstrips what market demand alone would fund. The gap in installed capacity still favors the West, substantially. But the rate of change narrows the gap each quarter, 3 legs compressing. The fourth is where I promised you an honest break. Here it is, and it matters more than the first 3 combined. High bandwidth memory is not a faster version of DDR5. It is a categorically different manufacturing problem, and this is the leg where my read of the race changes direction entirely. High bandwidth memory requires stacking multiple dies vertically, connected by through-silicon vias. Microscopic copper columns punch through each die to create a vertical data highway. Picture a stack of 8 playing cards, each one thinner than a human hair, with copper pins the width of a virus punched through all 8 in perfect alignment. Now, imagine doing that on 10,000 stacks per wafer. A single misaligned pin on any card kills the stack. And the yield mathematics on a stack are multiplicative, not additive. If each die in an 8-layer stack has a 95% yield, the stack yield runs to roughly 66%, not 95%. Micron and SK Hynix have spent years developing the bonding chemistry, the thermal management systems, and the testing infrastructure that makes high bandwidth memory a product rather than a prototype. Chang Xin Memory Technologies has no confirmed production, high bandwidth memory product according to independent sources. Reports suggest early stage development only, and the leading edge node required for competitive high bandwidth memory, below roughly 15 nanometer class geometry at some layers, requires access to extreme ultraviolet lithography systems that Chang Xin Memory Technologies does not have confirmed access to, due to export controls on equipment from the Dutch manufacturer that produces them. Extreme ultraviolet lithography is not a technique you can substitute around. It is a specific machine, built by one company in the world, that uses plasma-generated extreme ultraviolet light to etch features smaller than any conventional lens can resolve. Not having access to that machine is not a skills gap, it is a physical constraint on how small the features can get. And it is enforced at the equipment layer, not the knowledge layer. My honest call, stated plainly, high bandwidth memory is not just a harder product. It is a different industrial ecosystem. The gap here is real, structural, and not addressable in 12 months, regardless of what any press release or policy announcement says. The Mirage case is real. If you extrapolate Chang Xin Memory Technologies' pace curves from the first 3 legs forward, the model predicts high bandwidth memory production within a handful of years. The trend lines, taken at face value, look like convergence is structurally inevitable, but trend lines built on a learning curve break when the next leg requires equipment you cannot procure. The lead in this leg is not a comfortable lead that a faster chaser will eventually close on current trajectory. It is load-bearing. It is holding up the margin structure of Micron's entire business model in the artificial intelligence infrastructure market. Micron and SK Hynix, high bandwidth memory and volume production, multiple generations deep, supplying the artificial intelligence accelerator market at pricing that reflects genuine scarcity. Chang Xin Memory Technologies. No confirmed production, reports suggest early stage development only. This is not a compressed gap. This is the leg where the Western clock is moving away from the chaser, not being chased. Which brings us to the forecast, hedged as exactly that, a projection, not a certainty. Over the next 12 months, through roughly mid-2026, the picture runs as follows. Chang Xin Memory Technologies will likely continue expanding DDR5 class capacity, and the yield gap to Micron on that node will continue to narrow, though reports suggest parity is not a near-term outcome. The pricing pressure on Micron's commodity memory margin in mainstream DDR5 is real and near-term. That is the direct consequence of the capacity expansion in Leg 3, and it is not something export controls are positioned to address on a short timeline. On leading-edge node and high-bandwidth memory, the structural barriers, equipment access, stacking process maturity, the multiplicative yield problem do not resolve in 12 months. Micron's high-bandwidth memory position in the artificial intelligence accelerator market and SK Hynix's dominant share of the same market is not structurally threatened in this window. My call, stated without hedging on the judgment, Micron's clock is still faster on the legs that matter most to its business model, and those legs are structurally protected in the 12-month window. The compression in the first 3 legs is genuine and accelerating. Chang Xin Memory Technologies is a faster follower than the industry priced in when it set Micron's valuation multiples, and that recalibration is already happening in real time. But this is a race where the chaser is running faster per leg than the leader budgeted for, while the leader is still on a categorically different track for the decisive event. The threat is real. The timeline for that threat to become existential for Micron's high-margin product lines is longer than the current noise level suggests. That DDR5 die we have been tracing through this entire race, Micron's version of it is still the benchmark for process maturity and yield. Chang Xin Memory Technologies' version is closing the gap in yield efficiency and production volume, leg by leg. But the next version of that die, stacked 8 layers high, punched through with copper columns thinner than anything a conventional lens could etch, moving data at high bandwidth memory bandwidth into an artificial intelligence accelerator. That version is still Micron's race to lose. Not because Chang Xin Memory Technologies isn't running hard, because the equipment required to run that leg is not on the track in Hefei yet. A closing lap does not announce itself. It shows up as a split that is tighter than the one before, then tighter again. Chang Xin Memory Technologies has run 3 splits that nobody in the Western analyst community fully predicted. The 4th split reversed. The race is not over, and the shape of the gap just changed. And shape is what tells you whose clock wins the decisive leg. The scoreboard says, Micron leads. The splits say, watch the next lap very carefully. Here is the question I want you to sit with. If Chang Xin Memory Technologies solves the high bandwidth memory bonding yield problem, and the Chinese state is funding that attempt seriously and with patience, which clock reaches the line first? And does the West have a response that isn't just another equipment export restriction? Drop your call in the comments. If you are following this race with us, subscribe and turn on notifications. We clock every leg as it runs.